The storm rolling across Dallas barely registered on Danielle Carter's mind as she stepped into Terminal C at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Rain streaked the massive glass windows. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the runways. Travelers hurried through the terminal carrying coffee cups, laptop bags, and private worries. Danielle moved quietly among them, dressed in faded jeans, white sneakers, and a grey sweatshirt that revealed nothing about her wealth or influence. Most people would have recognized her face from business magazines if they had looked closely. Fortunately, almost nobody did. That anonymity had become valuable. It allowed her to see how ordinary people experienced the world when no special treatment followed them. Her destination was New York City. A quarterly board meeting awaited the next morning. The meeting would determine the future of one of America's largest transportation companies. Danielle could have traveled on a private jet. Instead, she preferred commercial flights whenever possible. Numbers on financial reports told one story. Real human behavior told another. As she approached the boarding gate, she noticed tension immediately. A young Hispanic family struggled with carry-on bags while several impatient passengers complained loudly. An elderly veteran waited alone near the window. A college student slept across two chairs while holding a backpack against his chest. Small moments revealed character. Danielle had learned that long ago. Boarding began precisely at 4:15 p.m. She joined the line without announcing herself. Her first-class ticket rested inside a worn leather folder. Several passengers glanced at her casual clothing before turning away. The looks were brief but familiar. Assumptions often traveled faster than facts. Inside the aircraft, senior flight attendant Karen Mitchell stood near the first-class entrance. Karen carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she could judge a person's worth within seconds. Her smile appeared polished until Danielle presented her boarding pass. Karen studied the ticket longer than necessary. "Where did you get this?" she asked. The question caught Danielle's attention. "Directly from the airline," Danielle replied calmly. Karen's expression hardened. "I'll need additional identification." Several nearby passengers turned to watch. Danielle handed over her driver's license. Karen examined it with obvious suspicion. A businessman seated nearby smirked. "People try all kinds of tricks these days," he said loudly. A few passengers nodded. Danielle remained silent. The gate door closed behind the final boarding group. Rain hammered against the aircraft windows. Somewhere in the distance, lightning illuminated the dark Texas sky. Karen called for her supervisor. Within moments, operations manager Richard Holloway arrived. His expensive suit and impatient expression suggested a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Problem?" he asked. Karen handed him the documents. "Possible ticket issue," she said. Richard looked Danielle up and down. His eyes lingered on her sneakers, then on her sweatshirt, then on her inexpensive travel bag. His conclusion seemed immediate. "Ma'am," he said, "first-class fraud has become increasingly common." The accusation hung in the air. Nearby passengers began whispering. A woman lifted her phone and started recording. Another passenger quietly opened a social media app. The atmosphere shifted. It no longer felt like routine travel. It felt like a public trial. Danielle noticed every detail: the eager spectators, the certainty in Richard's voice, the absence of evidence. None of them knew her name. None of them asked questions. Yet many already seemed convinced she did not belong. Outside, rain continued falling across the runways. Inside, judgment arrived much faster. Richard folded his arms. "Until we verify everything," he said firmly, "you won't be taking that seat." The woman recording smiled as though she had found entertainment for the evening. Danielle slowly looked around the cabin. Then she reached into her leather folder. Not for identification, not for proof, for something far more important. As her fingers touched the document hidden inside, her phone vibrated. The screen displayed 6 missed calls from the board of directors and one urgent message that changed everything. The sender was the chairman himself. His words were short: "Do not reveal your identity unless absolutely necessary." Danielle kept her expression neutral as the message remained illuminated on her phone screen. Most people would have panicked. Some would have argued. Others might have revealed everything immediately. Danielle did neither. Years of leadership had taught her that the truth often revealed itself more clearly when people believed nobody important was watching. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. Around her, the cabin buzzed with quiet judgment. The woman recording continued streaming. The businessman who had questioned her presence leaned back comfortably, convinced the situation was already settled. Richard Holloway stood with the confidence of a man certain he was protecting company interests. "Please step aside," Richard instructed. "You're delaying departure for everyone." Danielle glanced toward the window. Rainwater crawled across the glass in crooked lines. Ground crews moved through the storm wearing reflective jackets. Beyond the runway lights, the Texas sky looked dark and unsettled. "I've presented a valid ticket and identification," Danielle said calmly. "Could you explain specifically what appears fraudulent?" Richard frowned. The question irritated him. "Experience," he answered. "After 20 years, I know when something doesn't look right." The response earned approving nods from several passengers. Danielle noticed something troubling. Nobody seemed interested in evidence. They were responding to confidence. Karen Mitchell folded her arms. "People who belong in first class don't usually create scenes like this." The irony almost made Danielle smile. She had not raised her voice once. Meanwhile, 3 airline employees had turned a routine boarding process into a public spectacle. Yet somehow she remained the problem. A young woman seated across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. Unlike the others, she appeared uneasy. Her name tag identified her as Emily Foster, a newly hired flight attendant. Emily glanced repeatedly between Danielle and her senior co-workers. Something about the situation clearly bothered her. Still, she remained silent. Danielle understood why. Speaking up against authority carried risks. Many good people convinced themselves that silence was safer. That silence, however, often allowed injustice to grow. The woman live streaming suddenly announced to her audience, "Looks like they caught another first-class scammer." Several viewers responded instantly. She began reading comments aloud. "Someone says this happens all the time. Another person says airlines need stricter enforcement." Her excitement seemed disturbingly genuine. Real lives had become entertainment. Richard checked his watch. "We're finished discussing this," he said. "Security is on the way." The words changed the atmosphere. Passengers straightened in their seats. Phones lifted higher. The possibility of an arrest added excitement to the unfolding drama. Danielle felt disappointment more than anger. This was exactly why she traveled anonymously. The company's annual reports showed excellent customer satisfaction scores. Diversity metrics looked impressive. Training programs appeared successful on paper. Yet reality often hid beneath statistics. A few minutes later, airport security officer Marcus Reed entered the aircraft. Unlike the others, Marcus did not immediately assume anything. He examined the situation carefully. "Can someone explain what's happening?" he asked. Richard spoke first. Naturally, he described Danielle as suspicious, potentially dishonest, possibly attempting fraud. Every statement sounded authoritative. None contained actual evidence. Marcus listened quietly. Then he turned toward Danielle. "Ma'am, would you like to tell me your side?" For the first time since boarding, someone had asked a simple question. Danielle appreciated that. "I purchased a ticket," she said. "I presented identification. No one has explained why either document is invalid." Marcus nodded slowly. The answer seemed reasonable, too reasonable. Richard sensed uncertainty and quickly stepped forward. "Officer, we're trying to avoid disruption." Marcus looked down at the documents. Then he looked back at Danielle. Something in her calm demeanor caught his attention. People hiding fraud usually appeared nervous. People caught lying often became defensive. Danielle appeared neither. Her composure felt unusual. Outside, thunder shook the aircraft lightly. Inside, another notification appeared on Danielle's phone. This time it came from the company's legal department. The subject line contained only 4 words. "Investigation file now active." And Danielle stared at the message. Then she slowly raised her eyes toward Richard, Karen, and the growing crowd. For the first time all evening, she began wondering whether revealing the truth might become absolutely necessary. Marcus Reed studied Danielle for several seconds. Years of airport security work had sharpened his instincts. The situation unfolding before him felt wrong. Not because of the passenger standing quietly in front of him, but because of everyone else. The accusations were loud, the evidence was absent. That combination rarely ended well. "May I examine the ticket myself?" Marcus asked. Karen hesitated, only briefly. Then she handed over the boarding documents. Marcus reviewed them carefully. The barcode appeared legitimate. The booking number matched company formatting. Nothing immediately suggested fraud. Richard noticed his uncertainty. "Officer, our senior staff already evaluated it," he said quickly. "We're trying to keep the flight on schedule." Marcus frowned. Keeping a flight on schedule doesn't replace verification. The remark created visible discomfort. Several passengers exchanged nervous looks. The live-stream audience, however, continued growing. The woman recording announced another milestone. Almost 5,000 viewers now. The number energized her. It worried Danielle, not for herself, for the company. A public mistake was already becoming a permanent digital record. Across the country, strangers were forming opinions based on incomplete information. That was the danger of modern outrage. Facts usually arrived after conclusions. A sudden voice interrupted the tension. "Maybe we should just let her sit down." Everyone turned. The speaker was Emily Foster. The young flight attendant immediately looked nervous. Karen's eyes narrowed. Richard's expression hardened. Emily swallowed, but continued. "I mean, if the documents appear valid, maybe we're escalating this unnecessarily." The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm outside. Richard stepped toward her. "Emily, this matter is being handled by experienced personnel." The message was clear. Stay quiet. Know your place. Emily lowered her gaze, yet Danielle noticed something important. The young woman had spoken anyway. Courage rarely appeared dramatic. Often it looked exactly like that. A nervous voice refusing to remain silent. Marcus handed the ticket back. "I still need additional clarification before removing anyone." Karen's frustration became obvious. "Officer, are you questioning our judgment?" Marcus answered honestly, "I'm questioning whether proper procedures were followed." The live stream camera captured every second. Comments began shifting. Some viewers now questioned the airline's actions. Others demanded more information. The certainty that had fueled the crowd was beginning to crack. Danielle's phone vibrated again. Another message appeared. This one came directly from the chairman. She opened it discreetly. "Board members are watching the live stream. Continue observing. Do not intervene yet." Danielle exhaled slowly. The board was watching. Interesting. Very interesting. That meant this incident had already reached executive levels, far faster than anyone aboard the aircraft realized. Meanwhile, Richard's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Regional operations. His confidence immediately returned. "Excuse me," he announced. He answered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Yes, everything is under control. Minor fraud issue. We'll have it resolved shortly." Danielle listened carefully. The description was inaccurate. Deliberately inaccurate. No fraud had been established. Yet Richard presented assumptions as facts. That behavior concerned her more than the original accusation. Poor judgment could be corrected. Dishonesty was different. Outside, lightning flashed again. The cabin lights flickered briefly. Several passengers glanced nervously toward the windows. The delay stretched longer. More travelers boarding nearby flights began noticing the commotion. Some stopped to watch through the open aircraft door. What started as suspicion was becoming a spectacle. Marcus stepped aside to make a verification call. For the first time, Richard appeared uneasy. Karen noticed it too. "What's taking so long?" she whispered. Richard didn't answer, because he suddenly had the same question. Why was a simple ticket verification becoming complicated? Across the aisle, the businessman who had mocked Danielle earlier quietly lowered his phone. The certainty in his expression had faded. Doubt was replacing confidence. Danielle observed everything, the shifting attitudes, the growing discomfort, the realization spreading through the cabin. People were beginning to understand they might have judged too quickly. Then Marcus returned. His expression was serious, very serious. He looked directly at Richard, then at Karen, then at Danielle. "There's something all of you need to know." "I know," he said. The entire cabin fell silent. Even the live stream audience seemed to pause. Marcus held up his phone. A company executive was requesting immediate contact. Not regional management, not corporate customer service, someone much higher. Much, much higher. And according to the caller ID, they were asking specifically for Danielle Carter. The silence inside the aircraft became absolute. Marcus held the phone in his hand while every passenger watched. Even the people recording seemed uncertain whether to continue. Moments earlier, the crowd had been hungry for drama. Now they sensed something entirely different approaching. Richard forced a laugh. "Well, let's hear it then." Marcus looked at the screen again. "The call is from Executive Operations Headquarters." Richard's smile weakened. Karen's face tightened. Executive Operations rarely involved itself in gate disputes, certainly not over an ordinary passenger. Marcus answered and activated speakerphone. A calm professional voice filled the cabin. "This is Rebecca Lawson from Executive Operations. May I please speak with Danielle Carter immediately?" Every eye turned toward Danielle. Richard quickly stepped forward. "This is Richard Holloway, Operations Manager. We're currently investigating a possible ticket issue." A brief pause followed. Then Rebecca spoke again. "Mr. Holloway, are you preventing Ms. Carter from accessing her assigned seat?" The question sounded unusually direct. Richard suddenly felt less comfortable. "We're following standard procedures." "What procedures specifically?" Another pause, longer this time. Richard searched for an answer. The problem was that he didn't have one. Not a real one. Most of his decisions had been based on instinct, assumptions, and appearances. None would sound convincing to corporate executives. Karen attempted to help. Her presentation raised concerns. Rebecca's voice cooled noticeably. "Presentation?" No one answered, because everyone suddenly realized how terrible that explanation sounded. Danielle remained silent. The board chairman's instructions still echoed in her mind. Observe, listen, learn. So she waited. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The businessman who had criticized her earlier stared at the floor. The live stream comments continued changing. Thousands of viewers were now questioning the airline's behavior. Some demanded accountability. Others wondered who Danielle really was. Rebecca spoke again. "May I ask whether Ms. Carter presented a valid ticket?" Marcus answered honestly. "Based on current verification, yes." "Did she present valid identification?" "Yes." "Has she threatened anyone?" "No." "Has she violated company policy?" "Not that I'm aware of." The answers landed like stones dropping into still water. Each created another ripple of discomfort. Richard's face had become noticeably pale. Rebecca continued, "Then why exactly is she being denied access to her seat?" Nobody responded, because there was no acceptable answer. Outside, rain hammered the aircraft fuselage. Inside, careers were beginning to unravel. Emily Foster quietly watched from the galley. For the first time all afternoon, she felt relieved. Someone was finally asking the right questions. Danielle's phone vibrated again. This time, it was a video conference request. The sender caused her eyebrows to rise slightly. Board Executive Emergency Session. The meeting had already started. That was unusual. Very unusual. Board members rarely assembled this quickly. Rebecca seemed to notice something happening in the background. "Mr. Holloway, remain where you are. Corporate representatives are joining this matter immediately." The call ended. No explanation, no reassurance, just instructions. Richard suddenly looked much older. Karen crossed her arms defensively. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Passengers sensed the shift. Confidence had vanished. Anxiety had replaced it. 5 minutes passed, then another. The delay stretched longer. No one complained anymore. Everyone wanted answers. A gate supervisor hurried onto the aircraft carrying a tablet. She looked nervous. Very nervous. "Richard," she said quietly, "corporate wants immediate access to the aircraft systems." Richard blinked. "Why?" They didn't explain. The supervisor lowered her voice further. "But I've never seen this level of executive involvement before." Karen overheard the comment. Her confidence dropped another level. The livestream audience had grown dramatically. Thousands of strangers were now watching events unfold in real time. News accounts had begun sharing clips. Questions were spreading online. What happened on Flight 728? Why was corporate involved? Who was Danielle Carter? Danielle already knew the answer. But she still said nothing, because the most revealing moments were often the ones people created themselves. Then the aircraft door opened once more. 3 individuals entered. None wore airline uniforms. None carried security badges. Instead, they wore tailored business suits and expressions of extreme concern. The moment Richard saw them, the color drained from his face. He recognized all 3 immediately. They weren't regional managers. They weren't corporate supervisors. They were members of the company's executive leadership team, and they had flown from headquarters specifically for this aircraft. One of them looked directly at Danielle, then smiled and, not politely, respectfully, the kind of respect reserved for someone whose authority exceeded everyone else in the room. Suddenly, the entire cabin understood. Whatever they believed about Danielle Carter was about to be proven spectacularly wrong. The arrival of the 3 executives changed the atmosphere instantly. Nobody announced their names. Nobody needed to. The expressions on Richard Holloway's face told the entire story. The confidence that had carried him through the afternoon vanished completely. Passengers who had spent the last hour judging Danielle now watched in uneasy silence. The woman live streaming lowered her phone slightly. For the first time, she looked uncertain. The tallest executive stepped forward. His silver hair and composed demeanor projected authority without effort. Every airline employee aboard recognized him immediately. William Grant, Chief Operating Officer, second only to the board chairman. William ignored Richard, ignored Karen, ignored everyone else. He walked directly to Danielle, then extended his hand. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter." The cabin froze. Danielle stood and shook his hand. "Good afternoon, William." A collective gasp moved through the aircraft. Several passengers exchanged stunned looks. Richard's stomach dropped. The familiarity between them was impossible to miss. William turned toward the crowd. His expression remained calm, but disappointment lingered behind his eyes. "I understand there have been concerns regarding Ms. Carter's eligibility to occupy her assigned seat." Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to. William nodded. "Then perhaps clarification is appropriate." The second executive opened a leather folder. Inside were company documents, executive credentials, and meeting schedules. Everything appeared official. Everything was official. The third executive addressed Richard directly. "Before we continue, I would like confirmation. Did Ms. Carter present a valid ticket?" Richard swallowed. "Yes." "Valid identification?" "Yes." "Any disruptive behavior?" "No." The executive nodded slowly. Each answer sounded worse than the last. Emily Foster watched quietly from the galley. Her pulse raced. She had never witnessed anything remotely similar. Karen attempted one final defense. "We were acting in the company's best interests." William finally looked at her. The disappointment in his expression deepened. "The company's best interests are served through facts, not assumptions." The statement landed hard, especially because everyone knew it was true. Outside, the storm continued moving across North Texas. Inside, another storm was forming, one that would not disappear with the weather. The livestream audience had exploded. National blogs picked up the story. Major news outlets began contacting corporate headquarters. Questions multiplied by the minute. Who was Danielle Carter? Why had senior executives rushed to the aircraft? Why did airline leadership appear alarmed? The answers remained hidden. For now. William turned toward Danielle. "Would you like us to proceed?" Danielle considered the question carefully. For months, she had traveled anonymously. She had listened, observed, learned. Today's events were not isolated. They reflected something larger, something deeper. Something the board had quietly investigated for nearly 2 years. She glanced around the cabin. At the passengers, at the employees, at the thousands watching online. Many now looked embarrassed. Some looked frightened. A few seemed genuinely remorseful. Danielle felt no satisfaction, only sadness. Because prejudice always carried a cost. Sometimes that cost arrived immediately, sometimes years later. But it always arrived. She nodded once. "Proceed." William faced the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, there appears to be considerable confusion regarding Ms. Carter's identity." Every person aboard leaned forward. Even Marcus Reed stepped closer. The moment felt historic, important, irreversible. William opened the folder, then paused. His phone vibrated. The screen displayed a message. He read it, looked at Danielle, then looked back at the crowd. His expression changed. Concern replaced composure. "Actually," he said quietly, "there is information that all of you need to hear before we continue." The cabin became silent once again. William took a slow breath. This incident is not happening by accident. Several people frowned. Richard looked confused. Karen looked terrified. Danielle remained perfectly still. William continued, "For the last 18 months, the board of directors has conducted a confidential nationwide investigation into discrimination complaints throughout the company." A murmur spread through the aircraft. Passengers exchanged shocked glances. The live stream comments exploded. William's voice remained steady. "And according to preliminary findings, Flight 7228 has just become the most significant case in that investigation." The color disappeared from Karen's face. Richard nearly stumbled backward. Marcus stared at Danielle, suddenly understanding, not everything, but enough. And then William revealed one final detail, a detail that changed the entire meaning of the afternoon. Ms. Carter wasn't randomly assigned to this flight. He looked directly at Danielle, then back at the crowd. She was here because the board specifically sent her. The words hung in the cabin like thunder after a lightning strike. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The live stream audience surged past 30,000 viewers as social media platforms spread clips across the country. Danielle Carter had not boarded Flight 7228 by coincidence. She had been sent. Richard Holloway stared at William Grant as if he had misheard him. "Sent?" he asked weakly. William nodded. The board authorized a series of anonymous passenger evaluations following hundreds of complaints received over the last several years. Karen's hands began trembling. The realization was finally reaching her. This was never about a ticket. It was never about first class. It was about judgment. And she had failed the test spectacularly. Danielle remained standing beside her seat. She looked out the rain-covered window for a moment. The storm outside seemed calmer now. The storm inside the aircraft was only beginning. William continued. "Our investigation examined passenger treatment, complaint resolution, management conduct, and employee decision-making." He paused. "Today's incident has provided more information in 90 minutes than some investigations uncover in 6 months." Several passengers lowered their eyes because they understood they were part of that information. The businessman who had mocked Danielle earlier felt his face burning. He replayed his comments in his mind. At the time, they had seemed harmless. Now they sounded ugly, cruel, embarrassing. Across the aisle, the woman live streaming looked increasingly uncomfortable. Thousands of viewers had already clipped her earlier remarks. The internet never forgot. Danielle understood exactly what she was feeling. Actions were easy, consequences were harder. William opened another folder, this one much thicker than the first. Several pages carried legal markings. Others displayed complaint summaries, statistics, employee reports, passenger statements. "Over the past 18 months, William said, our company documented repeated allegations involving racial profiling, economic discrimination, and inconsistent enforcement of customer policies." A murmur moved through the cabin. Marcus Reed folded his arms. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Danielle wasn't simply observing passenger experiences. She was investigating systemic problems. William glanced toward Richard. Unfortunately, several incidents were connected to employees assigned to this flight. Richard's face went pale. Karen looked as though she might collapse. Emily Foster stared in disbelief. She had known tensions existed. She had never imagined corporate leadership was tracking them. The third executive stepped forward. Her name was Laura Bennett, Chief Legal Counsel. That title alone made several employees visibly nervous. Laura addressed the cabin calmly. "At this moment, all personnel decisions remain under review." Nobody missed the meaning. Review often preceded termination, especially when lawyers became involved. Danielle finally spoke. Her voice remained calm. "This isn't about revenge." The statement surprised everyone. Karen blinked. Richard looked confused. Danielle continued, If this were about punishment, the investigation would have ended months ago. She looked around the aircraft. The purpose was understanding why these situations keep happening. Several passengers listened carefully. The anger they expected wasn't there, neither was arrogance. Only disappointment. That somehow felt worse. Every complaint represents a person, Danielle said. Someone who paid for transportation and instead received humiliation, suspicion, or disrespect. Silence followed. The words carried weight because they were true. Outside, airport vehicles moved through puddles beneath the runway lights. Inside, years of assumptions were being exposed. Laura's phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the screen. Her expression changed immediately. William noticed. "What is it?" Laura looked toward Danielle, then toward the crowd. "The board has completed its emergency vote." The cabin froze. Even the live-stream comments seemed to slow. A board vote during an active incident was almost unheard of. William frowned. "Already?" "Unanimous," Laura replied. Danielle raised an eyebrow. That surprised even her. The board usually debated everything. For hours, sometimes days, yet somehow they had reached a unanimous decision within minutes. Laura took a breath, then delivered the announcement. Effective immediately, the board has authorized extraordinary executive powers regarding the outcome of this investigation. Passengers looked confused. Employees looked terrified. Marcus looked intrigued. Danielle looked thoughtful. Then Laura revealed the final detail. The detail that explained everything. Because Danielle Carter is not merely a board representative. Every eye turned toward Danielle. Laura's voice echoed through the silent aircraft. She is the newly appointed executive chair of the entire company and the future chief executive officer. For several seconds, nobody reacted. The revelation seemed too large to process. Future chief executive officer. The words echoed through the aircraft cabin. Passengers stared. Employees froze. Even the storm outside appeared quieter. Richard Holloway slowly lowered himself into an empty seat. His legs no longer trusted him. Karen Mitchell covered her mouth. Tears formed instantly, not because Danielle held power, because the entire afternoon suddenly looked different. Every assumption, every accusation, every decision, all of it now stood exposed beneath the brightest possible light. Danielle looked around the cabin. She saw fear, embarrassment, regret, but she also saw something else, understanding. For the first time, people were examining their own behavior instead of hers. William Grant handed her a tablet. "The board wants you to address everyone directly," he said. Danielle accepted it. A live video conference immediately appeared. 12 board members filled the screen. Several looked exhausted. Others looked furious. One elderly director spoke first. "Danielle, the entire executive committee is watching." She nodded. "I know. What happened today is unacceptable." Danielle remained silent. The director continued, "But we need your recommendation before taking action." That statement surprised many people aboard. The board wasn't issuing orders. They were seeking guidance from her. Karen closed her eyes. The reality became impossible to ignore. Danielle possessed far more authority than anyone had imagined, yet she had spent the entire afternoon being treated like an inconvenience. The irony was devastating. Danielle turned the tablet toward the employees. "I want everyone here to hear this conversation." Several board members exchanged glances, then nodded. "Agreed," the chairman said. The live stream audience climbed higher, 40,000, 50,000. More viewers joined every minute. Across America, people watched from offices, homes, restaurants, and airport terminals. The story had become national news. Danielle finally spoke. "Before we discuss consequences, I want to discuss causes." The chairman leaned forward. "Go ahead." Danielle looked toward Richard. "When did you decide I didn't belong in first class?" Richard looked stunned and he expected accusations, not questions. He struggled, because the honest answer sounded terrible. "When I saw you." The words escaped before he could stop them. The cabin became silent. Danielle nodded slowly. "Exactly." She turned toward Karen. "And you?" Karen's voice trembled. "I made assumptions." "Based on what?" Karen hesitated, then answered, "Your clothes." The truth sounded ugly when spoken aloud because it was ugly. Danielle faced the passengers. How many of you reached similar conclusions? Several people looked away, others stared at the floor. One elderly passenger slowly raised his hand, then another, then another. The honesty hurt. But it mattered, because change rarely begins with comfort, it begins with truth. The woman who had been live streaming started crying quietly. "I thought I was documenting wrongdoing," she said. "Instead, I helped create it." Danielle nodded. "Thank you for saying that." No sarcasm, no anger, just acknowledgement. The chairman finally spoke again. "Danielle, the board requires your formal recommendation regarding employee discipline." Everyone aboard held their breath. This was the moment, the decision, the consequences. Careers hung in the balance. Danielle looked through the rain-streaked window, then back at the frightened faces around her. She thought about every complaint she had reviewed, every passenger who felt powerless, every employee who remained silent, every manager who ignored warning signs. The easy choice would be punishment. The satisfying choice would be termination. But easy and effective were rarely the same thing. She turned back toward the tablet. The board waited, the cabin waited, the nation waited. And then Danielle delivered an answer that shocked everyone. "I recommend no immediate terminations." The reaction was instant. Passengers gasped. Board members looked stunned. William Grant blinked. Karen nearly collapsed from relief. Richard stared in disbelief. But Danielle wasn't finished. Her next sentence changed everything. "Because what I discovered today is much bigger than 3 employees." She looked directly into the camera. "The real problem is a culture that taught them these assumptions were normal." The chairman slowly sat back, understanding dawning across his face, and deep inside corporate headquarters, several executives suddenly realized the investigation was about to become much larger than anyone expected. The conference room at company headquarters fell silent. Board members stared at Danielle through the video connection. Several had expected anger. Others expected immediate dismissals. Nobody expected a challenge to the entire corporate culture. The chairman folded his hands. "Explain your reasoning." Danielle nodded. Outside the aircraft, rain continued falling across Dallas. Inside, thousands of eyes remained fixed on her. "Removing 3 employees would be easy," she said. "It would also allow everyone else to believe the problem ends with them." The words landed heavily, because they were true. Richard stared at the floor. Karen quietly wiped tears from her face. Neither could deny what had happened. But Danielle wasn't talking only about them. She was talking about everyone. The passengers, the managers, the executives. The systems that allowed assumptions to become decisions. "Today's incident involved more than employee conduct," Danielle continued. "It involved spectators who stayed silent, managers who skipped verification, passengers who accepted accusations without evidence, a culture that rewarded certainty more than fairness." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. The businessman who had mocked her felt his stomach tighten, because he suddenly understood he had been part of the story too. Not the victim, not the hero, part of the problem. The chairman leaned forward. "What do you recommend instead?" Danielle already knew the answer. She had been developing it for months, long before boarding Flight 7228. A complete cultural audit. The phrase immediately captured everyone's attention. Board members exchanged serious looks. William Grant nodded slowly. He had expected something similar. "Every department," Danielle continued, "every region, every leadership level, training programs, promotion systems, complaint investigations, hiring decisions, customer interactions, everything." The live stream audience exploded with reactions. Comments flooded the screen. People shared personal stories, experiences from airlines, hotels, hospitals, banks, schools. The issue suddenly felt much larger than one flight, because it was. Emily Foster watched quietly. She felt something unexpected: hope. For months, she had noticed behavior that felt wrong. She had questioned decisions privately. Now someone with power was saying those concerns mattered. That realization changed her. The chairman broke the silence. "If we approve this audit, the findings could be devastating." Danielle nodded. "If we ignore it, the damage will be worse." No one argued, because everyone understood the logic. Problems hidden eventually become crises. Problems confronted become opportunities. A notification appeared on William's phone. He glanced at it, then looked surprised. The stock price just recovered. The statement caught everyone's attention. Laura Bennett checked her own device. He's right. The legal counsel sounded genuinely shocked. The decline that followed the incident was reversing. Investors were responding positively, not to the scandal, to the response. The realization spread quickly. Accountability created confidence, transparency created trust. Pretending problems didn't exist created neither. Karen looked up. "Why are you helping us?" The question sounded sincere. Danielle turned toward her. For several moments she said nothing. Then she answered, "Because someone once helped me." The cabin listened. "When I was 22, I made a terrible management decision." Several passengers looked surprised. The future CEO had made mistakes. Of course she had. Everyone did. "My supervisor could have ended my career," Danielle said. "Instead, he taught me why I was wrong. That lesson changed my life." Karen lowered her eyes. Richard listened carefully. For the first time all afternoon, neither looked defensive. They looked reflective. The difference mattered. Then another message arrived on Danielle's phone. She opened it, read it once. Then again, her expression changed. William noticed immediately. "What happened?" Danielle looked toward him, then toward the board, then toward the crowd. The message had come from the company's independent investigators, the team conducting the confidential 18-month review. Their findings had just been finalized, and among hundreds of employee files, one name appeared more frequently than any other. Not Karen Mitchell, not Richard Holloway, not anyone currently aboard the aircraft. The name belonged to a senior executive sitting inside headquarters. An executive currently participating in the board meeting. Someone far more powerful. Someone who had spent years quietly blocking complaints from reaching leadership. Danielle slowly looked toward the video screen. One board member suddenly appeared nervous, very nervous. And for the first time that day, Danielle realized the investigation's biggest revelation wasn't on Flight 728 at all. It was already waiting inside the executive boardroom. The atmosphere inside the aircraft changed once again. For the past hour, attention had focused on Flight 728. Now Danielle realized the deeper problem might be somewhere else entirely. She looked at the message from the investigative team. The report contained hundreds of pages, thousands of interviews, 18 months of evidence. And one name appeared repeatedly. Martin Graves, Senior Executive Vice President, 31 years with the company, board advisor, industry icon, corporate legend. Danielle slowly raised her eyes toward the video conference screen. Martin sat among the board members. His silver suit looked flawless. His expression remained composed, but not perfectly composed. A small crack had appeared. Fear. The chairman noticed it too. "Danielle?" he asked. The cabin became silent. Every passenger sensed something significant approaching. Danielle took a slow breath. "I just received the final investigation summary." Several board members immediately sat forward. The report had been anticipated for months. No one expected it to arrive during a nationally watched crisis. "And?" the chairman asked. Danielle looked directly at Martin. The executive avoided her eyes. Only briefly, but everyone noticed. The investigation identified a systemic failure point. A murmur spread through the boardroom. William Grant folded his arms. Laura Bennett opened a legal notepad. Martin remained motionless, too motionless. The live stream audience exploded with speculation. Thousands of comments raced across screens nationwide. People sensed a larger story emerging. They were right. Danielle opened the report. Over the last 5 years, more than 400 discrimination complaints were downgraded, delayed, or dismissed before reaching executive review. Shock spread instantly. Passengers stared. Board members exchanged alarmed looks. Even Karen and Richard seemed stunned. The number was far larger than anyone expected. "How?" William asked. Danielle turned another page. "Because someone created an unofficial filtering process." The chairman's expression darkened. "Who?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The moment felt enormous. Martin's face had become noticeably pale. Danielle finally answered, "Martin Graves." The boardroom erupted. Several directors spoke simultaneously. Others stared at Martin in disbelief. The veteran executive looked trapped. For years, he had been untouchable, respected, influential, protected. Now thousands of witnesses watched as that protection vanished. "That's impossible," one director said. Laura Bennett immediately responded. "Actually, it isn't." She opened the legal copy of the investigation. The evidence is extensive. Emails, internal memos, policy overrides, complaint suppression, witness testimony, patterns stretching back years. The evidence painted a disturbing picture. Martin had not created discrimination. He had enabled it, protected it, minimized it, repeatedly. The chairman turned toward him. "Tell me this isn't true." Martin finally spoke. His voice sounded weaker than anyone had ever heard. "I was protecting the company." The answer stunned everyone, because it wasn't a denial, it was an admission. Danielle closed the report. "That's the problem." The cabin listened carefully. Too many people confuse protecting an organization with protecting its reputation. She looked toward the passengers, then toward the employees, then toward the board. Real protection comes from fixing problems, not hiding them. Silence followed, heavy silence, the kind that arrives when uncomfortable truths finally become impossible to ignore. Martin leaned back in his chair. 31 years of influence were collapsing around him. Not because of one mistake, because of thousands of small decisions. Decisions that seemed harmless at the time, decisions that accumulated, until eventually they created a culture. The chairman stood. His voice carried unusual authority. "Martin Graves, effective immediately, you are suspended pending termination proceedings and federal review." Nobody objected. Nobody defended him. The evidence was overwhelming. The live stream audience surged again. National news networks began breaking the story. What started as a seat dispute had become one of the largest corporate accountability investigations in company history. Danielle looked around the cabin. At Karen, at Richard, at Emily. At the passengers, at Marcus Reed. Every person aboard had arrived believing the story was about one woman sitting in the wrong seat. Now they understood the truth. The story had never been about a seat. It was about choices. And the final choice still remained, because the board chairman had one last announcement, an announcement that would determine the future of the entire company. And he intended to make it before Flight 728 ever left the ground. The chairman remained standing inside the boardroom. For the first time since the emergency meeting began, nobody interrupted him, not a single director, not a single executive. The evidence against Martin Graves had changed everything. The illusion that the company's problems existed only at lower levels was gone. Now everyone understood the truth. Culture always begins at the top, and so does accountability. The chairman looked directly into the camera. His voice carried across the aircraft cabin, through thousands of live streams, and into boardrooms across America. Today has exposed failures at every level of this organization. No one disagreed. Passengers listened quietly. Employees listened carefully. Board members listened nervously. But it has also revealed something equally important, he continued. Leadership willing to confront those failures honestly. His eyes shifted toward Danielle. The future CEO remained standing near seat 2A. The same seat she had been denied, the same seat that started everything. The irony was impossible to miss. The chairman took a deep breath. The board has completed a second vote. A ripple of anticipation moved through the cabin. Danielle looked surprised. She had not expected another vote. Neither had anyone else. Effective immediately, the chairman announced, Danielle Carter is appointed Chief Executive Officer of the company. The aircraft fell silent. Then applause erupted. Not from everyone, not immediately, but gradually, authentically. Passengers stood. Employees joined them. Even Marcus Reed smiled. The applause spread throughout the cabin, not because Danielle had power, because she had chosen how to use it. Karen Mitchell cried openly. Richard Holloway stared out the window. The weight of the afternoon settled heavily upon him. Yet Danielle noticed something different in both of them. They no longer looked defensive. They looked changed, and that mattered more than humiliation. The chairman continued. Furthermore, the board unanimously approves the cultural transformation initiative proposed today. The directors voted publicly, one by one. Every hand rose, unanimous. The livestream audience exploded. News organizations immediately pushed breaking alerts nationwide. Corporate reform, executive accountability, leadership transition. What began as a conflict on a delayed flight had become a turning point for an entire company. Danielle accepted the decision quietly. Then she addressed the aircraft one final time. Most people think leadership means authority. The cabin listened. They're wrong. Outside, the rain finally began to slow. Sunlight pushed through gaps in the clouds. Golden reflections appeared across the wet runway. The storm was ending. Danielle smiled slightly. Leadership means responsibility. It means asking difficult questions when easier answers are available. It means treating people with dignity before you've learned their titles, salaries, or backgrounds. Several passengers lowered their heads. The lesson felt personal, because it was. Today wasn't a victory for me, Danielle continued. It was a reminder that every person deserves fairness before judgment, respect before assumptions, humanity before labels. No one applauded this time. They simply listened. The words carried more weight in silence. Karen slowly stood. "I'm sorry," she said. The apology was simple, honest, nothing more. Danielle nodded. "Then learn from it." Richard stood next. "I will." Good. Because growth required honesty, and honesty had finally arrived. Minutes later, Flight 7228 prepared for departure. Passengers returned to their seats. The live stream ended. Phones lowered. The spectacle was over. What remained was reflection. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Danielle settled into seat 2A, the seat she had occupied all along. Not physically, but morally. A place earned through character rather than status. The engines accelerated, the aircraft lifted into the evening sky. Dallas disappeared beneath layers of fading clouds. Ahead lay New York, a new role, a new chapter, and a company determined to become better than it had been yesterday. Months later, the transformation became a case study taught in business schools across America. Complaint resolution improved dramatically. Employee trust increased. Customer satisfaction reached record levels. Most importantly, people began listening before judging. Not perfectly, but more often. And sometimes progress begins exactly that way. One decision, one conversation, one moment when someone chooses fairness over assumption. The storm that delayed Flight 728 lasted only a few hours. The lessons it created lasted much longer. Because real leadership isn't measured by the power someone holds. It's measured by the people they help become better. And sometimes the most important seat on an airplane isn't first class. It's the place where character is tested and revealed. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.